For the past decade or so, there's been a lot of discussion among woodworkers who love to pose questions such as, is CNC real woodworking, or are digital tools cheating? Aside from these being really tired debates at this point, those questions are red herrings that distract us from a more nuanced and interesting question: is what you produce meaningful? If you missed my previous video on this topic, let's quickly dispel the myth that woodworking is defined by its tools. By its most basic definition, woodworking is simply the activity of making things out of wood. It doesn't specify the skills, the tools, or the techniques used, or even how much human interaction is required. A table can be made using stone axes, draw knives, hand planes, table saws, CNCs, lasers, or robots. It's all woodworking. Second, there is no cheating in woodworking. Woodworking isn't a sport. A CNC machine is no more cheating than slicing potatoes with a food processor instead of a knife. In a production environment, use whatever tools make your work more efficient. And if you're a hobbyist, use whatever tools bring you joy. If you sell furniture, buyers are usually more interested in the end product than your personal woodworking journey. Nobody besides you really cares about your tools and techniques. One more thing to consider that's not brought up a lot is that digital tools have opened up woodworking possibilities to people with disabilities who might not be able to stand in front of a table saw or don't have the mobility to plane a flat board. Far from cheating, there are really no losers with digital woodworking. But I want to get into a more compelling discussion about digital woodworking. And I want to point out that my focus is on hobbyist woodworkers, not production shops. Professionals need to concern themselves with bottom lines and whatever tools will make their jobs easier and more cost-effective. This discussion is directed toward the bulk of my audience, people making personal projects in their garages and basements. Somewhere within the last decade or so, CNC machines and laser cutters reached a tipping point where they are now accessible to many home woodworkers. At least the more affluent hobbyists. While there are certainly machines that sell for a few $100s, you'll most likely need to spend at least $1,000 for a decent CNC, probably more. And that's not nothing to many aspiring woodworkers. So there's still a significant financial barrier to entry. At the moment, I would say there exists a woodworking digital divide. So a large number of people simply feel left out. And if you feel that way, it's important to keep in mind that social media and influencer marketing is giving you a skewed image of the reality of how most home woodworkers work. Tool companies are spending billions to get their tools in the hands of influencers with the goal of convincing you that your woodworking would be much better with whatever tool they offer. This hyper-consumerism has led to more and more YouTubers and Instagrammers becoming conduits for the tool industry. Free tools are given away in abundance to the people who most likely can already afford them. But underneath all of this is a low-key implication that not only will the right tools help you unlock perfection, but the assumption that perfection itself must be the natural goal of everyone. These days, a regular home woodworker might spend days building a bookcase, but hesitate to post a picture online because it isn't perfect, especially in this era of problematizing and this need to point out other people's imperfections. But those imperfections are what we should be celebrating. More on that in just a minute. If you're the type of person who loves buying tools on a regular basis, great, go for it. But just don't be under the assumption that this is the reality for most woodworkers. There's nothing wrong with keeping a tool for years, and if you need a new tool, the secondhand market can yield great results. Most of the tools in my shop are well over a decade old, some are much older than that, and they work fine. Plus, buying used tools when possible is ethically and environmentally responsible. One question you need to ask yourself before buying a CNC is, do you want to spend more time in your shop or less? The very nature of a CNC will demand you spend more time in front of a computer designing, or at least preparing files to be cut. A lot of weekend woodworker members in my courses work in tech and spend all day in front of a computer, and for them, woodworking offers a retreat from screen time, so a CNC isn't particularly appealing. But this doesn't mean if you have a CNC, you'll necessarily spend less time in your shop. There are plenty of other woodworking things you can do while the CNC is doing its thing. Most CNC owners still have a full complement of traditional power tools. I think this is important to understand. A CNC doesn't build projects on its own. It just cuts and carves boards into whatever shape you want. You'll still need to sand and assemble the project by hand, at least for now. There are already production robots that sand and assemble projects. Would you want one in your shop? I guarantee people will be arguing whether machine assembly is still woodworking. Hey, for a mere 40 grand, you can get a 5-axis CNC that'll carve 3-dimensional pieces and sculptures from blocks of wood. In a few years, no doubt this will be in many home workshops. We are certainly headed toward a day soon when a regular garage woodworker will be able to build complete projects without leaving their desk. Or perhaps woodworkers won't even require a shop at all. I can imagine remote woodworking on demand shops where you would send files and just simply pick up your completed project or have it shipped to you. Again, the question isn't, is this woodworking? You designed the project, it's a product of your imagination, and it was made with wood. It's woodworking. But would you embrace that level of automation in your hobby? I'm certain many people will find great joy in that style of woodworking. Now, what if AI could take that tedious design work off your plate too? We can already describe a piece of furniture to AI and have it produce an image. It's pretty crude right now, but eventually I have no doubt we will be able to describe exactly what we envision, and AI will create designs to send directly to a robot that will cut the wood and assemble the entire project. Our job will be as editors to tweak those generated designs and to select the wood and presumably to load it into the machine. Every advancement in tool technology makes reaching the dream of perfection closer and closer. Sure, it's great to strive for perfection, yet with digitally controlled tools, it seems our standard of perfection is now the factory-made piece. With digital precision and repeatability, we seem to be working toward the goal of stripping away any element from our projects that reflects us as individuals or reveals our human flaws. We often hear that any machine is just a tool used to reflect what we can imagine. And if you're opposed to technology and you really want to be a woodworking purist, then you should also probably chop down your own tree and use tools that you make yourself. Usually this argument suggests that a stone knife is just as valid a tool as a table saw, and I totally agree with that. Again, the question isn't whether this is woodworking or if it's cheating. To get back to the question I posed at the beginning, is it meaningful? I have a feeling that a lot of the resistance to CNC stems from the fact that all other power tools require a human to physically guide and maneuver the wood through the machine, such as a table saw, or move the machine through the wood, like with a jigsaw. In this respect, a table saw is very similar to a stone knife. They both require direct physical human interaction. This entire element of the hands-on woodworking experience is removed from CNCs. To reiterate, I am not anti-CNC. These machines are super useful, especially in a production environment, and they allow pieces to be made with factory precision. The artistry and personal fulfillment comes from the design process rather than the execution. Much in the same way an architect finds fulfillment in designing a building. They won't hang the drywall or install the plumbing, but they can find satisfaction witnessing the completed building. Woodworkers like to joke about IKEA because it's cheap, factory-made furniture made with low-quality materials. But I contend that people would have a similar meh response if all of that stuff was made with real wood and sold at a higher price point. It looks like factory furniture because it's perfect. There is no indication that a human was involved at any point in its manufacturing. An item can be very expensive but hold very little value. But most hobbyists aren't even necessarily concerned with the value of the things we make. We make a bookcase because we need a bookcase, but more likely we simply enjoy the challenge of making a bookcase. How much monetary value it holds is usually irrelevant and not something we think about. And this is why, as hobbyists, the fundamental question we all need to ask ourselves is what I produce meaningful? The human errors and imperfections in our woodworking are what make it meaningful. A bookcase with a gouge on one top edge where your router slipped makes it unique. It may have pissed you off when it happened, and that's great. You're not a robot. Leave that gouge. Every time you look at it, it'll bother you. But being pissed off and bothered by our own flaws and mistakes is part of the human experience. You made a bookcase that is completely unique and doesn't look like it came out of a factory. You accomplished something a CNC is incapable of. You have the power to achieve far more than factory perfection because your woodworking isn't about that bookcase. It's about you. And that's what makes your work interesting. Congratulations, you're on your way to finding meaning in your work. And if you'd like to give woodworking a shot, check out my award-winning course called The Weekend Woodworker. You'll be building your first project this weekend, no experience necessary. And I've got a free guide showing you how you can get all the tools you need for less than $1,000. Lots less than that if you buy used tools. Please download it over at mytoollist.com. Thanks for watching.